Raised bed gardening is an absolute game changer. In this video, I'll take you through all the steps to make a basic raised bed. Keep in mind some of the benefits of raised bed gardening involve better drainage for your soil, which leads to healthier plants. You have better control over the soil within it, and you can plant more densely, meaning you can actually get more out of the area that you're working with. In this video, we're going to make a rectangular bed, but you can make one of any size or shape that you prefer. By making the beds all the same size, I'm able to stack them in as many heights or different tiers that I like, and I can also move them and rearrange the garden entirely in between each season. The sun may be misleading in this video. It's only about 40 degrees out. This is a perfect project to do any time of the year, but I would recommend doing it in the fall or spring as you get in your garden ready to go. Before we get started on the project, I want to talk about one of the nuances with raised bed gardening to make sure that this project is right for you before you begin. This has to do with crop rotation. You should only grow the same crop in one location every 4 years. If you have 4 raised beds, this can easily be accomplished by rotating the crops counterclockwise or clockwise every season. If your beds aren't the same size or you specifically made them to cater to the individual crops that you grow, well, you have some other options as well. You can use a granular fertilizer that you can spread within the soil and give nutrients to your plants that way. Another easy alternative is to get water-soluble fertilizer that you mix into your watering can and then spread to the plants that way. But regardless, make sure you're aware of that fact, otherwise when you plant the same crop in the same location on the following year, it won't do so well. The first part of the video will take you through the basics, just building a box, that way you can get started with your garden. The second part of the video, if you're interested, is going to add a mesh to the bottom of the box to prevent any rodents from coming up underneath it. The final part of the video, we'll show you how to build a cover for this, and this cover or top can easily be opened while you work on your plants. This is great for things like strawberries, where you may want to prevent the birds or other pests from getting at them. The first step is to acquire some lumber, and you can get this from a hardware store and even some of the big box stores. Most locations will actually cut this to size if you ask them. This is a really convenient way to skip the step involving a saw. If need be, you can always measure off the full board, which will come at 8 feet, mark where you'd like to cut, and these cuts don't need to be perfect, but I'd still recommend it. Using a handsaw or even a circular saw is perfect for this project. You'll get fairly straight cuts, and like I said, they don't need to be perfect, they just need to be pretty close. Now, if you're building a modular system like I have here, you'll want to make sure that all the boards are in the same fashion. What I mean by that is I have the shorter board here, and the fasteners going into the longer board, which make up the sides. If you connect the boards in the other manner, your board will actually be skewed and they won't stack perfectly. So keep that in mind when you do this. Additionally, if you're doing a square gardening setup, and this is not square gardening here, just using this as an example, but if you cut this board to say 2 feet and this board to 2 feet, well, when you connect them, you've actually lost 1.5 inches of space in this setup. That means in a square gardening setup, you'll want to account for that. Since these are 2x8s, they're actually 1.5 inches thick, so you would want this one to be 2 feet and 3 inches along the side. That way you actually retain all the square footage you're looking for within the box or the planting area. The first step will be to drill some holes, and this will allow us to put screws in to connect the boards together. If you're using 2x8s like we are in this video, you have 1.5 inches where these screws can fall. I'm going to place 3, one towards the top, one in the middle, and one in the bottom. You of course can measure these if you want them perfectly spaced out. I've noticed in the past with the various boxes I have that it doesn't make any difference at all, they just hold dirt. 3 holes in the other side. At this point you can do the same thing to the other short board. For reference, these short boards are 2 feet and the longer boards are 4 feet. I find that an excellent size to use for a raised bed. For the next step, balance these boards however you can. I actually find this pretty easy to do against a wall or even the house, where you can lay the boards down on the ground. For the sake of this video, I'm going to show it to you upright. Make sure the side that you're working on is lined up properly, and then you go ahead and extend the drill holes down into the board that it's going to connect. In this example, I wasn't able to drill the hole furthest to the back on both sides because I have it upright against the fence. This would be a lot easier to do if you were working on the ground as mentioned, but for the sake of this video, or to save your back, I wanted to show you this method. In this situation, all you need to do is attach the first 2 screws on each side, then you can tip the boards and finish drilling the final hole and insert the screws then. I would recommend using Phillips head wood screws for this project. I have some leftover flathead wood screws that I'll be using, but I would definitely recommend Phillips instead. It's a good idea to get all the screws started before tightening up the final few turns. At this point, you can easily tip the box and drill the final 2 holes. Attach 2 more screws and then you'll be ready to flip the entire assembly over and it gets easier. Here's an example of what I meant by pushing it up against a wall or even a house. This will allow you to hold it firmly in place, and you can drill your holes into the board like this, even before anything else is assembled, or even attach the screws, and this is a really good way of doing that. But if you prefer to stand to save your back, it's an option as I showed you. Ensure the boards are as flush as possible, and then you can begin finishing to drill your holes. Again, I recommend starting all the screws before tightening them completely. This will help ensure everything's lined up properly. Now this very well may conclude your project. However, I'm going to attach some L brackets. This is going to give it some added protection from coming apart. However, I've had plenty of boxes just set up like this that have lasted more than several years. Since we'll be working with small screws and a fairly small bracket, I actually find this a lot easier to do on a table or any kind of setup where you can get this up off the ground. The easiest way to move the box at this point, whether you're putting it in its final destination or adding some additional support, is just get inside of it and pick it straight up. Tighten up both screws or add more if you like. As mentioned, you can pre-drill the holes if you're finding this too difficult to do otherwise. This is called hardware cloth, and it doesn't look anything like cloth. This is a fantastic tool for keeping pests out of your garden and even your raised beds. You may want gloves when you work with this. It can be rather sharp. And I find the easiest way to attach this is to line up a corner slightly set in, that way you don't have anything sticking out, and use a staple gun. If you don't have access to a staple gun, you can use some more screws with some washers around them to hold this in place. Once you're lined up, and I know that's difficult to see with this current angle, but as I unravel it, you'll see. You're just going to put some staples in, and that'll help hold it as you spread it down the box. If any of the staples don't go all the way through, you can tidy them up with a hammer. This is a great way of just helping it stay down and secure to the board. Work your way along every 3 or 4 inches. You can always put more fasteners if you prefer, and depending on what you're dealing with for wildlife. Do the same thing to the remaining 3 sides and you should be attached. At this point, you want to trim off the excess, and I actually find the easiest way is not to go like this. It's actually to hold your side cutters up like this and work your way across. It's tedious, but it'll get the job done. Eventually, once you've trimmed all the excess off, you'll have a nice screen that'll protect you from any of the wildlife or rodents. On a side note, this screen is excellent for making a sieve that you can sift through the dirt and just keep the finer particles if you're looking to do that for one of your boxes as well. Again, that may be your final step. However, we're going to do one more thing to this box, and that's going to add an insect net over the top, and we're going to attach it to a lid that can easily be opened when you want to work on what's within. Keep in mind that whatever you place within the insect netting should either self-pollinate or not require pollination at all, as you'll be blocking out anything that may do that for you. As seen here, strawberries are a great choice to place within an insect netting, but some other unusual choices include tomatoes and peppers. They can actually self-pollinate as long as they have wind or you tap on the stems. Next thing we're going to do is build a lid for the box that we just made. If you're really fussy about things, I would recommend actually taking a measuring tape and measuring the box you just made, as the wood may have been warped or even have a slight bend to it. Once you've done that, you'll want to cut boards to size. In this example, I'm going to use 4 feet by 2 feet again, same size as I used for the original box. First thing you want to do is take a look at your box and make sure that you're setting this up the same way so that the lid matches correctly. What I mean by that is make sure that you have the longer piece going the same direction as you do on the box. In case of the example, it's like this and not like this. That's going to make a difference in the overall size of your box. So make sure you double check and take a look at the actual box you made and do accordingly. I find the easiest way to attach the L brackets, which will hold the initial setup of this lid together, is by actually holding the longer side of the board on the shorter side of the board like so. Then take one of your L brackets, hold it in place with your hand, and then remove the longer board. this point, you can place a screw. You can of course measure and mark all of this as well. I don't find it too much of a problem and it assembles just fine, and I don't mind them being slightly offset from one another, but by all means, you do you. At this point, add a screw between your fingers and then screw it into the board, holding the L bracket in place. As long as you don't over tighten the screw, you'll be able to turn this L bracket, which helps lining this up and keep everything straight for you. If you have any difficulty at all, you can pre-drill holes and make the assembly even easier. Find it easiest to do the same thing to the other side of the board and then the other short board as well, attaching all 4 brackets, 2 to each of the short boards before assembling the longer sides. At this point, you can lay one of the longer boards down, take your shorter board with the L bracket, and then just place it down and add a screw. Do the same thing on the other side, and once we have both of these on, we'll add additional screws to add better support, and then we'll add the other board. Next, we're going to install some U-clamps along the 2 longer sides of the board. I've done one already, and I've completed that by installing the supports for the insect netting as well. This is what they'll look when completed. Altogether, I'm going to put 5 of these, which means you'll need 10 U-clips. I'll leave all the information for any of the parts you may need for this project that can't be acquired at a local hardware store. The insect netting comes with these supports, and these are fantastic for a project if you're doing a 2-foot by 4-foot box, as they'll fit perfectly within. If you're doing a different size project, these can actually be cut fairly easy with a sawzall or even a hacksaw. Like that, the hoops are installed, and you can tweak these a little bit even after they're installed. Alternatively, if you need to move them a fair amount, then you can unscrew them and move the U-clamps over. At this point, put the project right side up. Now we're going to take some insect netting and just drop it over the project. This is some leftover netting I have from other projects, so you'll notice that it's cut in certain places, but essentially just cover all this and make sure that you have excess hanging over all the sides. Again, make sure you have plenty of excess netting on all the sides. You can even tuck it under on the longer sides, and that'll prevent the net from blowing away if it's windy. Place another board directly on top of the first one you have and drill 3 holes, one on the left, one in the middle, and one on the right. After, take 3 screws, and it helps to start these by hand just prior, and then run them into the holes that you just drilled. This will actually secure the net into place. Double check that your net hasn't shifted, and then do the same thing to the other side. Drill 3 holes, place 3 screws. At this point, you'll want to cut 2 more boards for the length. And you want to make sure that you take account for the extra boards that have been added. For this project, I'm just using some scrap 1x3s I have, which is actually shorter. I don't mind the look, but if you want to make sure you have the same size, by all means do so. It's important, before you install the final side, that you get the net as taut as you would like. That way you have all the slack out. We'll drill 4 holes, put 4 screws on the longer side, then we'll trim the net to fit. At this point, you can trim the net however you feel fit. I find a pair of scissors doing short little cuts is a pretty effective way of doing it. Give the net some gentle tugs around. If there's any slippage, secure it with additional screws to help clamp down on it. We'll install some hardware onto the box. We're going to start with the hinges. It's important you do this in the final location unless you have a second set of hands to help you move it, or perhaps you're just strong enough to do it on your own. Install 1 or more hinges depending on the size of your project. Complete with that, go to the other side, install any handles if you like them. And just like that, you've got another place to grow that you couldn't before.